welcome to Hard Claim with Viva La Sam. I'm Sam, and this is a show where we talk to people who play Blood on the Clocktower and get their player perspective of the game. Our guest this week is Navean. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, thank you for having me.
All right, well, to start out, you requested that Trouble Brewing be loaded in. I did send out some tokens. You drew the mayor token, so if we were the first chat for the day, what would you like to claim?
So I can tell you that I've always wanted to play the hidden mare, but every time I pull the mare token, I get too excited and I don't do that. And instead, what I tell everybody is vote honk to win.
All right, fair enough. About how long ago did you discover Blood on a Clocktower, and how did that come about?
So I on YouTube am subscribed to a channel called Dicebreaker, and they are board gaming YouTube channel. And I want to say it was back in like 2019 where they did a game of Blood on the Clocktower. And they had two videos about it. One was just like a review of the game separate from the game that they actually played. And then there was a video of the game itself proper. And the audio on this was really bad. They had like some sections, I think maybe they had set up to catch some whispers or whatever, that the audio was fine, but the majority of the game, it was like really echoey. It was hard to hear. And initially, I did watch the video, but I wasn't paying attention because it was so hard to hear. So it just moved on with it. And then, like a year or so later, was when we had the, COVID-19 lockdown. And not that I was really doing all that much anyway with my time prior to that, but there's even less things to do. So I got all caught up on like all my YouTube stuff and videos that I had wanted to watch. And so I was starting to get really bored, and I was like, let's just go into a backlog of things and maybe rewatch some older videos that I know I hadn't been paying attention to when I watched them. And so I went back to the Blood on the Clocktower video and I rewatched it, and I sat through the audio issues and I listened really hard and finally actually picked up on the game. And I was like, oh, this game is cool as hell. Let's look more into it. And at that point, TPI had started like doing their Twitch stuff and started putting videos up, and so had Connecticut Blood on the Clocktower. They had like just started when I really started getting deeper into trying to find more Blood on the Clocktower than just TPI. And yeah, it just went from there.
What is it about the game that drew you to it?
So a big part of it is the complexity of it. The fact that every player has a role with a specific ability that does something. There's no real vanillagers here. Everything does something. And the way that they interact with each other, there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of complexity. It's both straightforward in how it plays, but also there's so much depth there. And the other thing that was really important to me was, unlike in games like Werewolf, which I had also watched kind of around that time, the dead players can still play. For me, the elimination that comes with games like Werewolf, where you're just done, and like, let's say you're the first player who dies in the night or the first player to get executed, and then you've just got like no real investment in the rest of the game aside from whatever attachment you might have to your team winning. And I don't have that much. So for me, the fact that death is not the end in Clocktower was a really big draw.
Werewolf was where my Blood on the Clocktower journey started, and we were doing 24-player games over Zoom, also because of COVID-19. And 24 players is pretty big for Werewolf. And if you're the first eliminated, then you're sitting for the next 2 or 3
Like 2
hours.
hours, yeah.
Yeah. I was going to ask, similar to that, do you have any experience with other social deduction games prior to Blood on the Clocktower?
Not really. I've watched some games of Werewolf. I watched Outside Xbox and Outside Extra played with some of the people who are on Dicebreaker, namely Johnny Chiodini, who's no longer with Dicebreaker, but they would moderate the werewolf games that they would play, and I was like, this is like cool to watch, but I don't think I would necessarily enjoy playing it, but it's a cool concept. And then I got into Blood on the Clocktower, and I was like, oh, that fixes all the problems that I have with all these other like social deduction games that I've seen, so let's try that.
So thinking back to your first game or several games, what were those like? Whether it's a specific experience or just generally how you felt about the game at the time, once you actually got to play it.
So I watched a lot of Clocktower before I actually started playing. Like I was watching and getting really deep into the rules and the roles and the interactions for literally months before I finally worked up the courage to actually play a game. I don't do very well in large groups. I don't do very well with people I don't know that well, and that can make accessing this kind of game a little difficult. I really am a strong proponent for the online versions of the game because there is basically zero chance, no matter how interested in this game I would have been, there's zero chance in person I would have joined a group of, 10 to 12 strangers in order to play a game. I would have always just sat on the sidelines and watched and had a good time watching, but, it's not as good as playing, of course. And that sort of distance that being online can shield for you, right? That is what allowed me to finally take that step into actually playing a game. Which the very first game that I ever played was on the Connecticut Blood on the Clocktower server, where of course I now help moderate and I help stream on Fridays as well. So that's kind of, I live in Connecticut, so it makes sense that I would have a particular interest in what's in my area. Um, but yeah, it was my first game. It's sort of like, yeah, I kind of know how everything works already because I've invested so much of my time and energy into learning about the game. But at the same time, no matter how much you do that, it does not really prepare you for that overload of information. It takes a while to adjust everything coming in at you all at once, where you have no way of knowing what's going on in the game because you're a player not looking at the grim as a spectator. So I had a lot of mechanics knowledge, but still had to take a lot of time to get used to the sort of like how to sort through all of the information, how to figure out who you think is lying and what info to follow and what not, and that kind of stuff.
It sounds like you were, in a sense, hooked on it before you even played. Once you started playing, was there a moment where you realized it did live up to your expectations or maybe exceeded it?
Oh yeah, from the get go, yeah, for sure.
How often do you get to play Blood on the Clock Tower, whether it's in person or online?
Honestly, probably not as much as I would like. I used to play a lot more, but some stuff in my life kind of changed, and my schedule has changed, and uh, I've had more health problems recently that kind of can get in the way of playing. I try to play every once in a while, at least. I have gotten to play in person not that long ago. Unfortunately, the one place in Connecticut that I know does like really regular games every Sunday is like an hour drive. So it's a little too far to me to make regularly.
Yeah.
But I did play, I think, maybe like a month or so ago. And I had a really fantastic game where I started as an evil snake charmer and I really wanted to be the demon. So I looked at everybody's faces when they were pulling tokens out of the bag. And I
Oh,
picked the demon on night one off of that. And
that's
I got
great.
to win. And it was a great time.
Amazing. So, talking about the differences between playing online and playing in person, how do you feel about those differences?
Uh, I don't feel the differences as much as other people do. Like, there definitely are some, don't get me wrong, but I know a lot of people who are just sort of like, yeah, now that I've played in person, I kind of don't even want to play online anymore because it's not that fun comparatively. And like, I certainly understand that viewpoint, but for me, there's not so much of a big difference that I don't in that like I find the online experience lesser. It's different, but it also makes it easier for me to access in a lot of ways because again, strangers in groups are not exactly an area that I feel comfortable in. And the more I can sort of sequester myself and like I can play online in my own home where I feel safe and comfortable, and that safe and comfortableness kind of translates into my ability to play. So I enjoy both formats for the differences that they have, and both formats do kind of their own things better than the other one does, and in some ways worse than the other one does. So I think they're both fantastic.
So when you sit down for a game and you're about to draw your token, and whether this is in person or online, how do you feel? What are you thinking?
Well, I'm definitely usually thinking, man, I hope I get to be evil. Because I really like to be evil, especially minions. You know, when you're the demon, like that is a lot of fun as well. But it's also more pressure. I think a lot of people tend to prefer playing as minions when they're evil because you get to have the fun of being evil without the pressure of, oh no, I could lose the game for my entire team if I misplay or get read too socially evil or whatever. But yeah, I definitely want to be evil a lot. I'm always happy when I am, but I am also happy when I'm not evil. I do enjoy playing good, probably just as much as I enjoy playing evil, but just in a different way. Evil has that kind of excitement in a way that good doesn't, but good also it gives me some of that relief of like, oh, okay, it's a less pressured game. That can actually be a social tell for a lot of people. Is
Mhm.
when you're evil, you just sound more nervous because there's more pressure on you. And so I think like taking a deep breath when you pull evil and trying to relax into it and be a bit more chill can help you with your social, like not reading socially evil as much. Um,
I feel
but
seen
yeah, a
right
lot of
now.
times, as soon as I see my token, I'm starting to think about, okay, what can I do with this? What do I think I want to claim this game? Do I want to hide my role? Do I want to give out my information early? And then I often just pick a player. Mostly at random, unless somebody like my partner is playing. They'll always be a player that I will just trust fall into for better or
Mhm.
for worse. But otherwise, I just sort of tend to pick a random player who is like maybe I didn't talk to somebody in the last game. Okay, you'll be the first person I talk to. That kind of thing.
Are there particular types of characters you like to play? Do you like to play something with more of an active ability, something a little more passive?
I don't have like a strong preference. I mean, obviously, an active ability gives you a little bit more to go on, and that can be really helpful. But I like to gather information from other players as well. So I don't mind pulling passive roles because then I can focus more on gathering information rather than trying to solve my own and putting pieces of puzzles together. And depending on exactly what type of passive role I have, like Mare is a really exciting role, even though most of the game you're passive until right up at the end. If I pull a role like Soldier, then, at least some of the time I'm going to try to do things like find a role swap and, confuse the demon and maybe get that sunk kill or whatever, right? Same thing with Outsiders. If I pull an Outsider, I can really enjoy trying to find somebody that I can trust, and maybe I get killed instead of them and they get more info. So I think a lot of times the game can sort of be like you make your own fun in the game. So even if you pull a role that you find less fun or it's less active, there's still plenty of things that you can do for yourself in the game and for your team.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that's where this game shines a lot. Is there's no one way to play any given character.
Yeah, absolutely.
So whether you're good or evil, what kind of characters do you like to bluff?
Ooh, I probably, like most people, am going to be drawn towards bluffing some of my more favorite roles on a script. That's probably a bit of a weakness that I think a lot of people have, where if you're
Mhm.
going to bluff something, of course, you're going to pick a thing that you're like drawn to. So for me, that's things like fortune teller or raven keeper. I really like roles that are sort of like, yeah, kill me in the night roles. So raven keeper, sage, farmer, those kinds of things. You can start to build layers into it, right? So it's like, okay, well, I'm actually this role, but I'm going to bluff raven keeper who's bluffing fortune teller, and you try to put some layers onto your bluff. That's always fun.
So how do you feel about madness as a mechanic in this game and the various characters that interact with that?
Ooh, time for my controversial take on madness, which is I think that more people should break madness privately when the storyteller's not around.
It's real
um,
spicy.
yeah, it's spicy. I enjoy madness. I like that there's different types of madness in the game, and I hope that I think somewhere in the rule book it might say that there's what is it, like half a dozen or something roles that interact with madness, or maybe it says a dozen. I can't
I
remember
think it's about a
exactly.
dozen.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to see more of those come out. But we've got some pretty interesting madness things right now. We've got the consequence of breaking madness is you get executed roles, so there's negative consequences. We have a positive consequence in Pixie, where if you keep to your madness, you get to gain something from that, which is really fun and interesting. And we also now have another character that has a negative consequence, but not a day ending one, but it does kill two players in the Harpy. I enjoy all of these roles. I will say I don't enjoy Serenovus locking. Where you stick to one player constantly for like the entire game. I get that sometimes it can be a good strategy, but I don't enjoy being on the receiving end of it, and I don't enjoy doing that to other people as well. So I tend to stick away from that. But other than that, I really enjoy Madness. I think it's an interesting way of interacting with the game, right? This concept that, like, at any point in the game, everybody's mad about something because they're trying to convince the group that something is true. How can we actually make this have an impact on the game? Is a really interesting sort of design space.
Yeah. Of the characters released in the last year or so, are there any characters that stand out as either being fun to play or a character that you would like to play that you haven't been able to yet?
Um, yeah, I really enjoy Ogre. I'm a big fan of Harpy. I think several of these recent releases are pretty fun. Yagababble is fantastic as long as you're playing with a group that's not going to try to, like, crack the whip and police people talking, because that's just not that fun.
Right.
But I try not to play with people who are going to be too controlling towards other people, because it's not pleasant for me to be around. Um, yeah, I would say those are definitely up in my sort of top echelons of characters of the recent releases. I do also appreciate some of the more simple and straightforward ones, like Knight or Steward, because I'm a prolific scriptwriter. So they sort of focused a lot on releasing characters more recently that would kind of be really good for script writers and offer some more variety and flexibility. And I can definitely appreciate that from a script writing point of view.
So thinking about scripts and starting with, I guess, with base scripts at least, what scripts do you like? Are there any scripts you don't like? Uh, Probably best to start. What's your favorite base script?
Oh, Trouble Brewing, of course. That's why I
Of
picked it.
course. What do you like about Trouble Brewing so much?
So it's got a mix of both informational roles and mechanical roles, which I think is pretty interesting, right? You get a variety. It's kind of like a little sampler platter, right? Like you have the opportunity to pull any of a variety of things to get a feel for kind of how a lot of the basics of the game works. It's got one of my favorite minions, of course, Poisoner. I really, really love Poison. Uh, don't talk to me about the fact that drunking is the same thing. I don't care. It's poison. I love poison. uh, so it's not difficult to understand the script or what's going on with it, but it just has like endless permutations, and every game that you play of it is going to be different. And that's true of a variety of scripts. There's a lot of scripts where that's true for. Some scripts are sort of like they're based around a singular concept, a one-off scripts exist as well, where it's like here's one setup that you can do in the script and then it's done. Whereas I feel like with Trouble Brewing and the base scripts in general, but especially with Trouble Brewing, it's just every game is going to be really quite a different experience.
you have a base script you like the least?
So, earlier when I was saying that for me, most of the time, there's not a huge difference between playing online and playing in person.
Hmm.
That is true, except for BMR. I dislike playing BMR online the most, and it's much better in person.
Interesting. What do you think the differences are there?
So one of the differences with online play is that people have more time and space really to sort of try to like quote unquote optimize the game and try to think of like optimal plays and optimal ways of voting. And I think that sometimes that can really detract from some aspects of the game. And in person, there's just the way that information flows and the way that people vote is kind of different, and there's a lot less of that sort of thing. And so in BMR, um, one of the things that I dislike is just that constant, like, let's double tap. We need to double tap this player. Oh, nobody died in the night. We're double tapping. And I find that can kind of make me feel like the game is a little bit stagnant. And it's like, no, if we think it's a mastermind day and we think there's a living evil, I'd rather just execute the player that we all think is evil than do a double tap, that kind of stuff. And I find that there's less of that sort of like hyper focus on this one specific way to play in BMR of double tapping all the time. That happens less in my in person experience.
So thinking about custom scripts, are there custom scripts you like or don't prefer as much, and whether that's specific scripts or just a general like style of script?
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely not gonna like name any specific scripts because I don't want to like feel like I'm picking or calling anybody out. But as a prolific script writer, I have spent a lot of time thinking about the way roles interact and sort of figuring out what roles I think don't interact very well. And that's not in everybody's skill set, right? It wasn't in my skill set when I first started writing scripts either, right? A lot of my older scripts, definitely, if I were to go and look back at them again, I'd be like, ooh, that's not great. Let's maybe fix or change that. So, I'm not saying that anybody is bad or wrong for having some interactions that aren't very good on their scripts, but the reality is that there's a ton of custom scripts out there. I forget how many are currently on Just website, but we're definitely past 1,000. So not all of those are necessarily going to be constructed with roles that I think interact very good together. There's a lot of janky interactions that can exist in this game. So, there's definitely some scripts that I might avoid because I think that it's not very well balanced. There's some common things that I do see a lot that can be issues like gossip being way too strong on a script because it's practically the only thing that'll cause an extra night death. And it might be the only thing that'll cause an extra night death on a regular basis. And that can be like too much. That's a very common one that I see. I'm also a bit picky about certain roles, those being Heretic, which is one of my least favorites in the game. Also, Evil Twin is one of my least favorites in the game. Atheist scripts I would only play if the storyteller is somebody that I know very well and I trust to run a decent atheist game or a fun atheist game at least.
We'll be
Those are more
we'll,
about my feelings on those individual characters than necessarily the scripts that they're in, though.
we'll be talking a little bit more about those very soon.
Oh boy.
All right, so I'm pretty sure you're kind of familiar with the public descriptions of future editions. And, we have Garden of Sin, The Tomb, and Midnight in the House of the Damned. Based on what we publicly know about those, are there one that you think you're looking forward to more than the others?
I think based on their descriptions, probably Garden of Sin is the one that I would be most interested in. It's the one where, everybody is gaining information, everybody has something to do, including the outsiders, that kind of stuff. And I really enjoy collecting information in the game and figuring out mechanically what works together and what doesn't. And then once I've sifted through that, figuring out, okay, what is more viable based on, social reads and voting patterns and that kind of stuff. So I think that's probably the one that feels most up my alley.
All right. So we kind of alluded to this a moment ago, but I do like to ask about a series of what I think you could probably call as divisive characters. And we'll start with one you mentioned pretty early on, the Snake Charmer. How do you feel about the Snake Charmer?
Ooh, spicy. So, I always want to try to become the demon, which, is arguably maybe not the intent of how a role is meant to be played. Shrug. It's certainly always good for the good team. Usually, when a snake charming happens, it may not be good for you personally. But yeah, I do enjoy being evil. I enjoy trying to pick the demon and seeing what happens and how far in the game I can go. I think it's fun. I think it's funny. Um, I do think that the random night one snake charmings can feel rough. And I totally understand people outing their minions immediately when that does happen, because that's of course kind of the the that's how you play to win, and most people are playing to some degree or other for their team to win. I've personally taken the route of, if that happens to me, I'm just not going to out my minions at first anyway. I'm going to give them an opportunity to actually play the game for a little bit, and when it becomes relevant, we can start talking about, okay, well, they're not a demon candidate actually because they're just a minion, that kind of stuff. You can also try to get back on team if you can find out if you have a pit hag and see if you can figure out who the new demon is and get jumps to. I think that's always fun. Um, I I definitely can see why a lot of people might prefer the house ruling to, on the first night at least, run the snake charmer before demon and minion info, because that can make the night one snake charming feel less bad. So I'm in support of house ruling that. I think most people tend to find that more fun. But yeah, I like trying to become the demon. So
I was definitely going to ask specifically about the Leho rule, but you already covered that. Great.
way ahead of you.
All right. So how do you feel about Poppy Grower, especially if you're on the evil team with a Poppy Grower in play?
Oh man. It's always a bit disheartening when you find out there's a poppy grower, right? You're like, I gotta kind of do this on my own. Um, I don't mind it, but at the same time, it definitely does make the game harder for you. That being said, like, in some ways, it can make the game a little harder for the good team. Usually, the benefits of it far outweigh any kind of detriment that it might have to the good team. But I have seen games where, because a poppy grower's in play, the evil team can't sort of make plans together, they don't vote together, and that can actually make reading some social aspects of the game a little harder for the good team, right? It's harder to make a full team when that team doesn't know each other and can't work together. And I've seen some of the chaos that creates actually benefit the evil team. That's much more rare than the evil team just sort of getting screwed over by a poppy grower and maybe accidentally poisoning their own demon, or accidentally, killing their minions, or accidentally voting to execute the demon. I had a very silly poppy grower game once where I was the starting Scarlet Woman, and a barber died like immediately. I think we executed the barber, maybe might have been day one even, and I got swapped into being an evil Raven Keeper. So there was a good Scarlet Woman hanging out around there, which was really funny. And I was bluffing Balloonist that game, and I, based on like who had claimed what, there was a Godfather who claimed to be an outsider, and so the outsider count matched, quote unquote, what a balloonist being in the game would do. I didn't even think about the fact that Godfather would do it too. And so it turned out that my demon was bluffing balloonist. And I sat there entire game going, yeah, I'm doing fantastic. I'm going to get a good player killed. We're going to win. And I got my demon executed. And it was just an absolutely hysterical game. So, it can be difficult to play around. I think when you're writing a script with a poppy grower on it, you do have to really think about, like, okay, what demons can I put in play and what minions can I put in play that aren't going to like completely fuck over the evil team. Like I would caution putting it with something like a poisoner a lot of the time, only because one, you can have a poison killed poppy grower, which isn't very fun, or two, you can poison your demon, and even that one night of no death can really be quite disastrous for the evil team sometimes. So it's difficult to script for. It's difficult to find a script where it really feels like it fits and evil team has enough things that it can counterplay around it without just being completely overrun by not knowing anything. But it's really fun if you embrace the fact that there might be silly things happening in a poppy grower game.
Well, this is a character you've already mentioned. How do you feel about Atheist?
As I mentioned before, I would generally only play an atheist script if it's with a storyteller that I know and I trust. There's two kinds of atheist games that I think can be enjoyable, and I've both played and ran both. One is where everything is just completely silly from sort of the beginning, and most people early on have a pretty good feeling like, yeah, this is just an atheist game. Let's just go ahead and kill the storyteller and win. But everybody is laughing because things that are happening are very silly and ridiculous. And the other type of game that I enjoy is a real true puzzle, right? So the storyteller sort of picks players out who are like, these are going to be my evil team frames. Once the good team has sort of killed them all off and cut off the remaining worlds where an evil team would make sense, then they can win, and that's usually towards the end of the game. So there's definitely a lot of things that you can do with atheists that are not going to be pleasant or fun. Um, and that's why I play with people that I know and trust to not do those kinds of things.
All right, another character mentioned earlier. How do you feel about Heretic?
I dislike it. Um, I think that no team in this game is quote unquote owed a solve. So if you get to the end of the game, sometimes you're going to be in games where there are like two completely viable worlds and there's nothing within the game itself, the mechanics of the game, the information of the game to help you distinguish between them. And it becomes, it comes down to something like social reads or Occam's razor, what makes the most sense, what's the most straightforward, that kind of thing. But to some degree, there's a little bit of a coin flip going on there. And I feel like Heretic is just sort of doing that to like every single game where a heretic is on the script. And I don't find that pleasant for me personally. So I don't really like the character. I will still play games, scripts that have heretic every once in a while, but I try to sort of minimize my exposure so then not getting like grumpy.
All right, one more character to talk about that we haven't mentioned yet. How do you feel about Legion?
So theoretically, I don't have a problem with Legion. I think it can make for some fun and interesting games. I've been in those games where it's made for a fun and interesting game. I have unfortunately also been in several games that were not fun. It is another role that can be really dependent on the storyteller because
Mm-hmm.
they get to decide what good roles are going into the bag. And I've been in games where the wrong kinds of outsiders are in play. There's too many outsiders in play. As a note here, I'll point out that the Legion guide says most of the time you should not have any outsiders in play. But I've been in games where there's been multiple outsiders and not always like not necessarily fun outsiders to play until the end of the game, where you just are not going to get any relief from being that outsider. So unfortunately, some of my experiences has kind of made me very wary of the character. So in a similar thing with atheist, I now generally will only try to play Legion scripts with storytellers that I know well and I trust to run a good Legion game, and that will run the count the way that it should be ran, which is where it does not get announced immediately 0 votes. Because I have also, unfortunately, I was in a Legion game where the storyteller who started it had an emergency come up and had to leave and get a substitute storyteller in. But of the people who were available, the only one who could come and do that was somebody who didn't really have much experience with Legion, and so we had started the game with the vote not being announced to zero immediately, and then this inexperienced storyteller came in to finish the game out, and then the first thing that happened was a Legion fail vote, and it was like, well, that's not very fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have one more question we like to end on. So looking at this trouble brewing script, you can interpret this question however you'd like. Which of these characters would you like to be in real life?
Oh, oh boy, that is a spicy question. This is gonna sound bad, but I am gonna say poisoner. Let me explain before you think I'm out here trying to murder people. No,
I would never think
I
that.
like dangerous things. I like scary things. I like creepy things. I like things that have that edge to them. And a lot of poisons can be derived from plants. You have also other toxins, so venom, which is not the same as poison, but venom in spiders and snakes and other things. Some actually, there's like one snake out there that's like a poisonous snake. There's like a lizard that's poisonous as well, I think. So I'm really drawn to poisoner and poison as a concept. That's part of why I'm drawn to that as a mechanic, is because it really kind of speaks to some of my actual real life interests. And like, if I could, if it were safe and I had the room, but I don't, and it wouldn't be, I would absolutely have like a garden full of plants that are just absolutely deadly.
Awesome. All right. Well, before we go, is there anything you'd like to plug?
Yeah, you can come and check out the Connecticut Blood on the Clocktower channel. We stream on Twitch every Friday, and we also have a Discord. If you've not already joined, then you can certainly message me at any time, and I can give you a link. Or when you check out our Twitch, we also have a link that we can spam there for you to join, and we would love to see you.
All right. Well, with that, thank you for joining us, Navean.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and thank you all for watching. We'll be back next week with another episode of Hard Claim with Viva La Sam. Take care.
Bye.